guys, this is Bart coming to you from TST Industries in Florida. Welcome to TST Garage and welcome to 2024. It is mid-January 2024 and I have great news. We have a new bike in the shop. As you can see, it's a Suzuki. This is the GSX-8R. It's the newer, younger brother to the GSX-8S. As you probably know, we've jumped on board with the GSX-8S platform really early on last year, and we produced a bunch of parts. We produced aftermarket intakes, all sorts of controls, crash protection, fender eliminator, and we're working on a taillight. And now this bike is coming out, soon to be available to the general public. And we have a whole catalog of parts that's just coming over from the S model that's going to be available for this bike. We'll also have to come out with some new parts dedicated to this bike because there are some differences. But before we get into all that, we like to break the bike in and we like to measure the baseline dyno numbers just to see what we're going to do with it and what progress we actually can measure once we get into all the performance upgrades that we're going to be making. Now, our performance upgrades include dyno tuning. We do have flash program packages. We have intake packages, and we also sell some exhausts. On this particular bike, we still have the stock exhaust because we had to break it in and, as I mentioned, get the baseline numbers. So what you see here is the stock package as far as performance goes. We already started making some modifications to it by bolting on some of our parts. We'll go over the parts that we've already mounted on in the next video that we'll call the product showcase. For now, I just wanted to talk about what we found in our baseline runs. We typically like to ride the bike around a little bit and then put on the dyno and complete the process of the break-in on the dyno. So that's what we did. And then we started cycling the load and getting an increase in temperature and then getting it up to higher RPMs and then demanding more and more load till we got to the point where we were comfortable putting full load on it. And that's when we started measuring the output. Before I get to the actual output, let's talk about top speed and individual speeds in individual gears. As the bike comes from the factory, what I see here is first gear tops out at 45, second gear tops out at 63, and third gear 86. We go to gear 4, 104. In fifth, we maxed out at 120, and in sixth, we maxed out at 135 and a half. Now, this is without rider load. This is without the resistance of air. Obviously, this is what the bike is capable of if you were riding in a vacuum. So on the road, you'll encounter slower speeds. And then also once we start digging in the engine, putting our performance packages on, we'll see an increase in potential, and we'll report that to you when we get into that. That's enough for top speed. What I did here was I chose several of the runs that were sort of in the max performance that we found, and then we averaged them, and then we picked one that was the absolute max. So this is how I'm going to be talking about the results and discussing them with you. We also compared the results to the same data sets from the S model so that we could tell you what we found. Now, here's a grain of salt that you guys have to consider. This is on our dyno. The numbers are not absolute. It's our dyno that reads a certain way. It is consistent from one run to the next on our dyno, but if you try to compare it to XYZ company in Oregon, they have different air, different elevation, different conditions, and their dyno is a little bit different. So the number will actually be not 100% comparable, but that is the grain of salt that you have to consider. The other thing to consider is that this bike is not the same as the rest of the Rs that you will find out there or potentially buy yourself. They will vary slightly in performance. It's not a great jump, but even on our dyno, when we measure 2 or 3 different bikes of the same brand, same model, they will have subtle differences in the output, and that's just what happens. At the end of all this, I just want you to keep in consideration that these 2 data sets are of our bikes. We'll have to wait until this bike launches to the general public and more people get it in their hands and tuning shops get it so we could compare the numbers that they found. We're actually waiting for our friends out on the West Coast to get their hands on this bike and report the numbers so we could see if what we found is consistent across the board, or if it's sort of unique to our two bikes that we own. We will have more of that when we discover that information. So for now, let's just talk about the numbers, which is probably why you guys are here watching this video anyway. All right, let's talk about horsepower. I will first discuss the absolute max values that I found in the max runs. At the peak, which is indicative of the total performance, but not really the meat of what we're talking about here, I found 79.5 horsepower at the peak, which happens at 8,300 RPMs on this bike. And the max power that I found on the S model when we first broke it in was 77.5, right around the same region. It was 8,100 RPMs. So we do see a 2 horsepower jump right there from the S model to the R model. And as far as torque goes, the peak occurred at 6,700 RPMs on this particular bike, and it was 56.25 foot-pounds. The S model delivered almost 55 foot-pounds at 5,500 RPMs. Now those are just peaks. When you look at the actual chart, which we will have posted, you will see that the peak is not really where the performance increase matters. The actual performance increase of this bike versus the S model that we found is a broad range of increase of the entire line shifts up. So at any given point, you will see an increase in horsepower and torque, and some of the really big jumps are close to 3 horsepower and 2 foot-pounds of torque, which constitutes about 4% difference. Now that's pretty big, considering that the engine is set to be the same and tuning is set to be the same. So something must be different in there. I'm thinking that it's probably the cam timing or possibly the cam profiles. We have no knowledge of that yet. We will dig into the engine and find that out later on. Now, I can already see that this bike is gonna pull harder. It's also less wavy. When we look at several of the data sets that we've averaged together, we took a block of dyno runs data and we averaged them. Output from this bike is super smooth compared to the stair-stepped S model output. Now that just shows me that Suzuki polished out some of the gremlins that they had. Now, they're not really gremlins, they're just, as a product goes into the meat of the life cycle, the manufacturer typically irons out some of the issues that they had early on, makes it a little bit better. That just shows that Suzuki is polishing their product and they're trying to bring you a better product every year, year after year. And that is very indicative here. We have smooth output. There's no stair step in it. The torque curve is super smooth and it really does deliver more than the previous S model. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun here with this bike at the track. We're planning to go pretty far into it. I wanna do some motor work. I wanna see if we could get over that 100 horsepower mark. I feel like with just the stock numbers here and knowing what we've already done with our flash tune programs combined with good aftermarket exhaust and our intake modifications, I know that with some motor work and maybe like U4 instead of regular gas, we're probably gonna be over 100 horsepower, no big deal. Now, in the beginning here, we're gonna work on some cosmetic parts and some crash protection parts and get those packages ready for you guys. And then we'll get into all the rest of the stuff where we're gonna tear the bike down and convert it into a race bike. In the meantime, we will also be working on some performance upgrades. We're already testing our flash tune programs on this bike and I'm seeing good results. We just wanna make sure that we don't jump the gun. So mid-January, they're not available yet, but if you check on our website, tstindustries.com, they will be available shortly. As soon as we validate them and get our friends that also do performance upgrades to validate our work, we will then release them and make them available to you and put that big old smile on your face when you get on that throttle. That's it for me here. Thank you for watching. TSTindustries.com is where you'll find all the parts and more info on this bike, so please check us out, drop me a comment. I love talking to you guys. Let us know what you think, let us know what we should be developing, good, bad, ugly, whatever, throw it at me. Thanks for watching, ride safe, see you later.